You will keep that gate open, or we will have it removed at your expense. That road is functionally part of our community now. That was Diane Pruitt, president of the Stillwater Ridge Homeowners Association for 9 years, standing at the foot of my driveway on a Tuesday morning with a clipboard against her chest and a man in a polo shirt filming me over her shoulder. The road she was talking about ran across the bottom 40 feet of my land, a gravel spur my grandfather had cut by hand in 1951, and she had decided it belonged to her subdivision because their only paved entrance happened to feed off the end of it. My name is Russ Calloway. I am 61 years old, a retired land surveyor, and I had spent the better part of 30 years reading deeds and easements for a living before I ever moved back to this ridge. What Diane did not know, standing there in her white sneakers on my gravel, was that the easement her entire subdivision relied on to reach the county highway had a term on it. It was not perpetual. It was set to expire, and the right to renew it sat with whoever owned the strip of ground it crossed. So when she told me the road was functionally hers, I thought about that quiet little clause and I said nothing. What would you have done? Standing on land your own grandfather cleared, with a woman telling you it was hers because she had decided so. Let me back up, because the gate was the end of a long climb, not the start of it. I grew up on this ridge. My grandfather, Earl Calloway, bought the original parcel in 1949, 112 acres of timber and pasture along the spine of the mountain, back when the only way up was a logging trace and a strong mule. He cut the gravel spur himself the next year so a truck could reach the home site, and he built the house with his own hands over 3 summers. My father was born in that house. So was I. When I left for college and then for a surveying career that took me across 4 states, the land stayed in the family, leased out for hay and grazing. The house shut up and never sold. My wife Carol and I always said we would retire to it. She did not get the chance. She passed 4 years ago in the spring, and the last clear thing she asked me was to take our daughter back to the ridge and finish the porch the way Earl had drawn it. So I did. I sold the house in town, packed up my daughter Nina, who was 14 then, and we came home. I knew the land the way a surveyor knows land, which is to say I knew it on paper before I knew it under my boots. Before we moved, I pulled every instrument recorded against the parcel. Going back to the original patent, deeds, the chain of title, 2 old mineral reservations, and 1 easement. That easement was the interesting one. In 1978, my grandfather had granted a right-of-way across the bottom 40 feet of the spur to a developer who was platting the land below us into what would become Stillwater Ridge. The developer needed legal access from the county highway up to the new subdivision, and the only graded route ran across Earl's gravel. Earl, who was nobody's fool and had watched 2 neighbors lose ground to handshake deals that turned out to favor the other man, granted the easement for a term of 50 years, renewable by mutual agreement, with the renewal right tied to the servient estate. I have read a great many easements written by farmers and ranchers who did not trust lawyers, and most of them say forever, because forever is easy, and a man in a hurry does not think about the year he will be dead. Earl wrote 50 years. He wrote it in that square hand of his, and he had it recorded. And I have always believed he wrote a term instead of forever on purpose, because he wanted whoever came after him to keep a say in the land, instead of signing it away for good. In plain terms, the road below depended on crossing my family's ground, and the permission to keep crossing it ran out in 2028. And only the owner of my land could agree to extend it. I read that clause sitting at my kitchen table in town, 4 years before Diane Pruitt ever pointed a finger at my gate, and I copied it out, longhand to be sure I had it, and I filed the certified copy in a manila folder labeled in Carol's handwriting because she had labeled the folders before she got sick. When she was still well enough to sit at the table and tease me about a man who brought his work home from the county office. I want you to remember that folder. It is the whole story. Sitting closed on a kitchen table for 4 years, waiting. For the first year, nothing happened. We finished the porch. Nina started at the county high school and joined the cross-country team, running the ridge roads in the gray light before school. I cleaned out the barn, walked my boundaries, and reset 2 corner pins that had heaved out of the ground over 70 years. There is a thing that happens to a surveyor over a long career where you stop trusting your eyes and start trusting the record, because the eye will tell you a fence has always been the line when the deed says the fence is 3 feet off and somebody's grandfather moved it in a dry year. So I trust the record. I had reset Earl's original corners against his 1949 description and found them within an inch of true. And I felt the old man's care in that inch. The subdivision below us was busy and prosperous. 40-odd homes with mountain views and a stone entrance sign lit up at night, and their daily traffic ran up the county highway and turned onto the bottom of my spur to reach their gate. I did not mind. The easement allowed it. My grandfather had shaken a hand on it, and I keep my family's word. In the evenings, Nina would sit on the half-finished porch with her homework while I planed the new rail, and I would tell her about Earl, how he cut the spur with a borrowed dozer, and a week of his own sweat, how he wrote his deeds out in a hand so square you could have set type from it. She had his chin. She did not know it yet. The trouble started the second spring, the day I put up the gate. It was a simple thing, a tubular steel ranch gate at the top of my driveway, where it left the shared gravel, and climbed to the house 150 feet upslope from the easement strip. I put it up because Nina was running alone at dawn, and people had started using my driveway as a turnaround delivery trucks and lost visitors. And twice, a carload of teenagers who left their bottles in my ditch. A man running cattle a mile over had told me he had seen a strange truck idling at the foot of my drive in the dark more than once. And after that, I did not like the thought of my daughter coming down off the ridge alone into a place anyone could sit and wait. So I dug the posts myself, set them in concrete, hung the gate so it swung true and latched clean, and I sighted it carefully, the way a surveyor sights anything, a full 150 feet above the highest point any easement reached. It blocked nothing that belonged to anyone else. The subdivision's access ran along the bottom 40 feet, untouched. I hung it on a Saturday with Nina holding the level, and we stood back and looked at it, and she said it looked like something Earl would have built. That was the nicest thing anyone had said to me in a while. On Monday, Diane Pruitt drove up in a white luxury SUV with a vanity plate that read STLWTR1 and parked it square across my own driveway, blocking me in, which I would think about later. "This gate is a violation of community standards," she said, before I had finished walking down to her. She wore a magenta blazer over yoga pants and pearls and white sneakers with not a mark on them. And she pushed her sunglasses up onto her head when she reached me, the way some people do to show you they are about to be reasonable. A clipboard was pressed to her chest like a breastplate. "We cannot have a gate on the community access road. It needs to come down by the end of the week." I told her plainly that the gate was on my land, 150 feet above any access she had, and that it did not touch the easement at all. I told her I was a surveyor by trade, that I had read every instrument recorded against this ground, and that I would be glad to walk the line with her right then, so she could see with her own eyes where her access ended and my driveway began. I even offered her my arm for the slope. She did not want to walk the line. "I have lived here longer than you," she said, though I had been born on the ground above her, and she had moved into a house her husband built 9 years back. "I know where the boundaries are. That road is functionally part of our community now, and the gate goes." That was the first time I heard the word functionally, and it would not be the last. She turned the clipboard so I could see a printed grid of dates and demerits, with my address at the top, as if the page itself were a kind of authority. The man in the polo shirt kept filming, swinging the phone from her face to mine, and back, and I understood I was being recorded for an audience I could not see. I did not perform for it. I told her once more, level, that the gate was mine, on my ground, and that she was welcome to the easement her people had always had, and nothing past it. She got back in the white SUV, backed it off my driveway in a spray of gravel, and rolled the window down at the bottom to tell me she would be in touch with the board. I went back up to the house, and that evening I opened the folder, and I wrote the date, the time, the plate number, STLWTR1, and what she had said word for word. Nina looked over my shoulder while I wrote and asked me if we were in trouble. I told her no. I told her we were in the right, and that being in the right meant writing everything down every time while it was fresh, because memory bends toward whoever tells the story loudest, and paper does not bend at all. That was incident number 1. The first fine came 8 days later, slid into my mailbox in an envelope with the HOA crest on it. $250 for an unauthorized structure on a community easement. The structure was my gate, which was not on the easement. I did not call her and shout. I photographed the notice, logged it, and filed it. Then I drove to the county recorder's office and pulled a certified copy of the 1978 easement, the plat, and my own deed, and I laid them side by side on my kitchen table. The easement was 40 feet wide along the bottom of the spur. My gate was 150 feet upslope. There was no version of the document under which my gate sat on her access. Reading the easement for the 10th time that afternoon, though, I noticed something else, something I had read before but not yet weighed, the 50-year term, granted in 1978, expiring in 2028. 2 years out then. Renewable only by agreement of the owner of the servient estate. That was me. I did not say a word about it to anyone. I want to be honest about my own heart here. There was a part of me that wanted to drive down to that stone entrance sign and tell every homeowner in Stillwater Ridge exactly what their president was poking at. That is not how you win these things, though. You win by letting the other side commit, fully and on the record, to a position they cannot defend. So I filed the second fine, and I waited. The fines came monthly after that, each one arriving in the same crested envelope, each one for the same gate on the same patch of my own ground. $250 in March, $500 in April, doubled for non-compliance, $1,000 in May. On a Wednesday in June, a certified letter came demanding immediate payment of the accumulated balance under threat of a lien against my property. A lien they had no standing to file, against land they had no jurisdiction over, for a gate they could not lawfully fine. I paid none of it. I logged every one. I photographed each notice on the kitchen table beside a ruler for scale, the way I would document a found monument in the field, and I filed them in order behind the tab. Nina had started calling the gate file. By June, the folder had a tally written on the inside cover in pencil. 5 notices, $0 owed and $0 paid, because none of it was lawful, and I had the deed and the plat to prove it any day they cared to look. They never asked to look. That was the tell, if I am honest. A person who believes they are right asks to see your papers. A person who is only performing authority never does. Then it stopped being about the gate. In July, a man showed up in a reflective vest with a lanyard and a clipboard, walking the easement strip at the bottom of my drive, taking photographs of my gate and my fence line. I went down to ask him his business. He was younger than the vest wanted him to look, and he kept glancing back up the road as if someone might come tell him what to say next. Routine compliance walk-cass, he said, documenting the violations on the access road. I asked him which jurisdiction he worked for. He said the community. I asked him again, slower, which government body. He could not name one. I asked to see his credentials, and what he handed me was a laminated card with the Stillwater Ridge crest on it and the words Compliance Officer printed under his name. The lettering a little crooked, the lamination still warm at the edges like it had come off somebody's home machine that morning. He was not a county inspector. He was a man Diane had hired and dressed up to look like one. I have stood next to enough real county inspectors in 30 years to know the difference between a public officer and a costume, and this was a costume. I thanked him, took his photograph, wrote down his name and everything on the card, and went back up to the house. He was gone within the hour, and I never saw him again. That was incident number 6, and it was the first one that made the back of my neck go cold. Because dressing a private contractor up as a public inspector is not aggressive landscaping, it is something else. It is a person who has decided the rules are whatever she can print on a card. I called the county that week, not to file a complaint, but to ask a question. The woman at the planning desk confirmed what I already knew, that Stillwater Ridge had no code enforcement authority of its own, and the county had sent no inspector to my address. She also told me, almost as an aside, that the HOA had recently applied for a permit to widen and pave the access road and install a new automated entrance gate, a project tied to a second phase of the subdivision, 40 new lots on the back acreage the developer still owned. The developer of record on that filing was a company called Pruitt Land Holdings. Diane's husband, Gerald Pruitt, was the principal. That was the day the whole thing turned over in my mind and showed me its underside. This was never about my gate or about community standards. The Pruitts were getting ready to build 40 more houses on the back of the subdivision. 40 more houses meant 40 more households, driving in and out, and the access road that fed all of it crossed the bottom of my land on an easement that was about to expire. They needed that road. They needed it widened, paved, and made permanent, and they needed the permanence before 2028, because after 2028, the right to cross my ground reverted to a clean question that only I could answer. And a developer cannot sell a lot whose road might close in the buyer's lifetime. Diane was not fining me over a gate. She was clearing the one landowner who stood between her husband and a very large amount of money, and she had decided the cheapest way to do it was to make a quiet retired widower feel surrounded, fined, and watched until he signed whatever they put in front of him. She thought a stack of paper and a man in a costume vest would do it. She had looked at my calm and read it as weakness, the way her kind always does, and at Miss Reed was the trap. Because a calm man with a folder is not a weak man. He is a patient one. I sat with that for a long time, long enough that the coffee went cold and the light moved across the kitchen floor. Then I made a phone call of my own to an old colleague named Hollis Tate, a retired title examiner who had taught me half of what I know about reading a chain of title back when we were both young men working county courthouses for a living. I told him what I had and asked him to pull the full recorded history of the easement and the abutting parcels and tell me plainly whether I had it right or whether I was an old fool seeing what he wanted to see. He called me back 2 days later, and I could hear him smiling through the phone. "Russ," he said, "you have it more than right. That easement is the only legal access that subdivision has to the highway. There is no other recorded route, no secondary road, no back way out. If it lapses and is not renewed, those 40 homes below you and any new ones they dream up are landlocked, except across your ground. And the renewal sits with you alone. Nobody else, no board, no county." He paused, and his voice dropped the way a man's does when he has found something serious. "Whoever is leaning on you does not understand what they are leaning on. They are standing on a trapdoor and finding the man who holds the latch." I asked him to put that in writing, and he did. A clean 2-page memo on his old letterhead, dated and signed, and it went into the folder behind the plat where I could lay my hand on it without looking. Here is the part I am not proud of, and will tell you anyway, because the lesson at the end depends on it. I could have stopped there. I could have simply waited for 2028, let the easement lapse, and watch the whole scheme die. Waiting 2 years, though, meant 2 years of fines, fake inspectors, and a woman who had shown she would escalate, and there was a cleaner path. Hollis had mentioned, almost in passing, that the original 1978 easement was not the only instrument touching that road. There was a second, narrower easement recorded in 1986, a utility and maintenance right-of-way that the developer had granted to a small private road association back when the subdivision was first built, and that association still nominally existed, holding the maintenance rights and a recorded interest in the roadbed itself. Over the decades, it had gone dormant, its members scattered or dead, its single remaining asset that recorded interest in the very strip Diane needed. If someone owned that interest, they would have a recorded senior say in any paving, widening, or gate the HOA wanted to install on that road. The HOA had simply assumed the association was defunct and the rights had evaporated. They had never checked. So I checked. It took 6 weeks and 3 trips to the county and one very patient afternoon with the last living officer of that road association, an 88-year-old man named Walt, who lived 2 valleys over in a tidy white house with a flag on the porch and a dog the color of a biscuit asleep on the steps. I had tracked him down through a 30-year-old meeting minute and a phone book. When I told him at his kitchen table what the association still held, he laughed until he had to take his glasses off and wipe them. "Son," he said, "I figured that paper was worth about as much as a Confederate dollar. We hadn't met since Reagan." He made coffee. He showed me a shoebox of the association's records. The original recorded interest folded in thirds and soft as cloth, and a list of members, every one of whom but him had passed. He was its sole surviving officer, with authority to act, and the association held its recorded maintenance and improvement interest in the roadbed, free and clear. I told him plainly what it was worth to the people downhill and what it was worth to me, and that I would pay a fair price, recorded and above board, with a real attorney and nothing hidden. He thought about it over a second cup. "My granddad helped grade that road," he said. "I'd rather it went to a man who'd read the deed than to one who'd pave over it. We did it properly." A real attorney drew the assignment. Walt signed it with a steady hand, and we filed the recorded assignment and deed of interest at the county on a Thursday in September. When the ink dried, I owned the recorded improvement and maintenance interest in the roadbed that the Stillwater Ridge HOA relied on for its only access, and the renewal right on the easement that crossed my own land. I bought the easement they relied on, and I told no one. Not Nina, not Frank, not Cole Mathers. The folder knew that was enough. The fines kept coming through the fall. Diane did not know the ground had shifted under her. In October, she stood up at a county planning commission preliminary hearing on the road widening permit and called my property. On the record, a holdout parcel obstructing a community improvement, and described my grandfather's gravel spur as functionally a public road that the current owner is selfishly attempting to privatize. I was in the room. She did not see me. I wrote it down. In November, she crossed the last line. A crew of contractors arrived at the bottom of my drive on a Monday morning with a skid steer, survey stakes, and a set of bolt cutters, and they began clearing brush along the easement strip and staking a widened roadbed that ran several feet past the recorded 40 into my pasture. I knew the moment I saw their stakes that they had run the line wrong on purpose, because no honest crew sets a center line that wanders into a man's grazing ground by accident. One of them walked up toward my gate with the bolt cutters in his hand. Nina was home that morning sick from school, and she called me on my cell from the kitchen window, her voice coming in broken pieces. "Dad, there are men. They have cutters. They are at the gate." I was 20 minutes out at the county office as it happened, and I made my voice as level as I could and told her to lock the door, stay inside, start recording from the window, and not to go out for any reason, not for anything. She did. She got 4 minutes of clear footage of a contractor putting bolt cutters to the chain on my gate while a man in a Stillwater Ridge polo pointed and directed him. My hands were not steady on the wheel the whole way home. Then I called the sheriff. The deputy who came out was a younger man named Cole Mathers, polite and careful, and he did exactly what a good officer does. He stopped the work, told the crew to stand down, and put the cutters back in the truck, and took everyone's information in a notebook. Then he came up to me and told me plainly that the HOA had a permit application pending and a claimed easement, and that on a contested boundary, with paperwork on both sides, he could not simply take my word over theirs at the curb. If I had $1 for every fence line dispute where both sides swear they're right, he said, I could retire today. This gets sorted in a hearing, Mr. Calloway, not in my report. Bring your documentation. He was not on anyone's side. He was a man following the only road his job allowed, and I respected him for it. I told him I understood, and that I would have everything in order. Before he left, he walked down to the staked line, paced off the distance from the recorded edge to where the stakes ran into my pasture, frowned at the gap, and wrote that down too. That number went into his report, and his report went into the record, and the record does not forget. The County Planning Commission held a full permit hearing on a cold Thursday morning in December in the commission chamber downtown, and the room was packed. Half of Stillwater Ridge was there, neighbors who had been told by their president that a selfish holdout was blocking their road. I sat in the back in a clean shirt with the folder on my knees and Hollis Tate beside me because I had asked him to come in case the chain of title needed a second voice that had read it. Diane sat in the front row in a fresh magenta blazer with Gerald beside her in a sport coat, and the HOA's attorney at the applicant's table, a younger man with a thick binder of his own. The county's planning director, a measured woman named Priya Anand, ran the hearing from the dais. The HOA presented first. Their attorney described the road widening and the new automated gate as routine improvements to existing access, presented the 1978 easement as their authority, and characterized me, by name, as an obstacle to a project the community needed. Diane took the podium and said it one more time, the line she had said at my gate and at the preliminary hearing, and now here, that the road was functionally part of the community and the renewal was a formality, a signature they expected the county to help them obtain. Gerald nodded along beside her. The neighbors in the rows behind them nodded too, because they had only ever heard the one story. Then the director asked if the abutting owner wished to be heard. I came up to the podium with the folder. I did not raise my voice. I have learned that the quietest thing in a loud room is the thing everyone leans in to hear. I set the folder on the podium and opened it to the first tab, the one in Carol's handwriting. I laid the certified 1978 easement on the table in front of the dais and asked the director to note for the record the one detail the applicant's attorney had not mentioned. The term, 50 years. Granted in 1978, expiring in 28 months, renewable only by agreement of the owner of the Servian estate. I said that owner was me, that I had granted no renewal, agreed to no widening. There was a small shift in the room, a sound like a held breath, let go in 40 places at once. The attorney at the applicant's table began turning pages in his binder, fast. Then I laid down the second instrument. The recorded 1986 maintenance and improvement interest in the roadbed. Beside it, I laid the September assignment, stamped and recorded, and Hollis Tate's 2-page memo tracing the chain. I said the plain fact of it, slowly, so the court reporter could take it clean. The recorded interest controlling any improvement, paving, or new gate on that roadbed had been duly assigned in September. Any widening or new gate on that road required the consent of the holder of that interest. The holder of that interest had not consented and would not. Priya Anand read the documents for what felt like a full minute and was probably 15 seconds. She turned the 1986 instrument over, checked the recording stamp on the back, and set it down square. Then she looked at the HOA's attorney and asked him a single question in the flat voice of a person who already knows the answer and is giving you the chance to say it yourself. Had the applicant verified the chain of title and the recorded interests on the roadbed before filing this application? The attorney looked at his binder. He looked at Diane. Diane looked at the road widening drawings on the easel, as if they might rearrange themselves into a defense. Gerald's jaw worked once and stopped. The attorney said finally that they had relied on the 1978 easement and had not pulled the full title on the roadbed. The director nodded, as if that was what she had expected. She squared the papers, looked out at the room, and said on the record that the permit could not be granted over a senior recorded interest the applicant did not hold, and an access easement the applicant could not renew, and that the application was denied without prejudice, pending resolution of the property rights. She said it the way you would read a weather report. The room was very quiet. Somewhere in the middle rows a man said, under his breath, "Well, I'll be." Diane sat with her hands flat on her knees and did not say functionally again. She did not say anything at all. I closed the folder, thanked the director, and went and sat back down next to Hollis, who let out a long breath and patted my arm once, the way you do at the end of a long day's work that came out right. Here are the two numbers I want you to hold against each other. In 9 years as president, Diane Pruitt's association had levied, by my tally, $2,750 in fines against my gate, every one of them unlawful, and collected exactly 0 of it. And the road widening and second phase project that Gerald Pruitt's company had spent, by the figures entered into the hearing record, just over $400,000 planning and pre-marketing, died in a single morning on the strength of a maintenance interest recorded in 1986 that they had never bothered to check. 0 collected from me, 400,000 lost by them. The gap is the whole story. The consequence was not something I did to them. It was something they did to themselves and simply had to wait to receive. Without the road widening permit and without a renewed easement, The second phase could not be built because 40 new homes cannot be sold on a road. The developer has no permanent right to cross. No title company would insure a lot whose only access expired in 2 years with no renewal in hand. The lots came off the market within the month. The bank that had pre-approved the construction financing sent a letter, Hollis told me later, the week after the hearing, and within a few months the financing the project depended on was pulled entirely. Gerald Pruitt's company restructured, sold off the back acreage at a loss to cover what it had already spent, and the second phase quietly disappeared from the county's plans as if it had never been drawn. The existing easement still had its time to run, so the 40 families already living below me kept their access exactly as my grandfather had granted it, unbothered because my fight was never with them and never had been. Their headlights still swung onto the bottom of my spur every evening, and I still did not mind. At the next association meeting, the membership, having learned in open session what their president's 9-year crusade had actually cost and very nearly cost them, voted her out. I was not there, but Frank told me about it. He said a woman, 3 doors down, stood up with the fine ledger in her hand and asked Diane to explain why the association had spent thousands in attorney hours finding a gate that sat on another man's land, and that Diane had said the word community 4 times in a row. 2 board members who had gone along with the fake inspector and the stack of fines resigned the same night rather than face the vote. Diane Pruitt kept her house. She lost the gavel, she lost the scheme, and she lost the road she had called functionally hers. Every bit of it the direct and automatic result of a position she had committed to without once reading the deed. A neighbor from the subdivision, a man named Frank who had once been fined himself for the color of his mailbox, walked up my drive a week later with a 6-pack and an apology I did not need. He sat on my new porch rail and looked out at the valley and told me half the neighborhood had never believed the story they were told, that they had only gone quiet because nobody likes to be the next address on the clipboard. He asked how I had known about the 1986 interest. I told him I had not known. I had checked. That is the whole of it. I checked, and they did not. I want to end where it matters, which is the porch. The first warm evening that spring, I finished the last of the porch the way Earl had drawn it, and Carol had asked me to fit the final rail, drove the last screw, and set 2 chairs facing the valley. Nina came out and sat in one, taller than she had been when we came back, her legs longer than the chair. And we watched the lights come on in the houses below. The same 40 households my grandfather had shaken a hand to let cross his road, and not one light fewer than the year before. Nina asked me if I was glad it was over. I told her it had been over for a long time. It was over the day a careful man in 1978 wrote 50 years instead of forever, and the day a road association in 1986 recorded an interest and nobody downhill ever thought to look. The gate still hangs at the top of the drive, 150 feet above a road that runs by the grace of a deed. On land, Earl cleared with his own hands, and I came home. I keep the folder in the kitchen still with Carol's handwriting on the tab, going soft at the fold. I have not had to open it since. So here is the lesson, plainly. Because you came this far and you deserve the practical part and not just the satisfaction. If someone with a clipboard tells you that your land is functionally theirs, do not argue with them at the curb, because the curb is where they win and the record is where you do. Go to the county recorder and pull your deed, your plat, and every easement and instrument touching your ground, going back as far as the records run. Read the terms, not just the lines on the map. An easement is not always forever, and the one your neighbor relies on may have a clause they have never read. Find out who holds the senior recorded interests in the roads, the utilities, the boundaries near you, because dormant is not the same as dead, and a right somebody forgot about is still a right somebody owns, and it can often be bought, plainly and lawfully, by the person it matters most to. Walk your corners. Mark your pins. When someone finds you, ask to see the authority in writing, and write down that they could not produce it. Keep a folder and write down every date, every name, every dollar, the plate on the truck, the moment it happens, because the calmest binder in the room beats the loudest voice. Every time they will tell you the rules. Go read the rules yourself. If you have ever had a clipboard tell you that your own ground was not really yours, I would like to hear how it went for you. So leave it below. If these stories are worth your evening, consider subscribing so the next one finds you. And next time, I will tell you about the rancher whose HOA tried to condemn his stock pond for a water feature, and the century-old water right he produced at the state engineer's office that turned their whole development dry. Until then, read your deed and keep your folder close.